So in the draft between G2 and Giant X, G2 did some very interesting but good picks that are picks that I really wouldn't recommend that normal people go for. This is a very do not try this at home type of draft. One that's very not suited for most teams to really go for. I would consider it extremely non-standard. So to start it off, note that G2 B1 Callista, right? Looks pretty normal at first until you realize that Renata is already banned. And the idea here is that every team that's played this AD carry pairs it with this champion. There's almost no exceptions at this time. In addition, it seems that there's been a little bit of a shift into bot lane dynamics because you see that the whole field of traditional ADCs that were prioritized heavily is open. So Varus is open, Ashe is open, Lucian, all the Lucian combos are open. It's just like no team wants it. And G2 go for a champion in the Callista that doesn't have its normal pairing. So while you might be thinking, okay, so what's happening here? We'll touch on that in a bit, but note that another pick here is the LeBlanc from G2 that is a counter pick into the Azir. It's good in the sense that LeBlanc has pressure and has priority, but there's the fact that most teams are not picking it at the moment because it's just not strong on this patch, right? The champion's just not very strong. So, therefore, when G2 drafts a champion like this anyway, it is out of necessity because of what G2's comp potentially needs in order to thrive. So, it's most likely leverage for later picks in the draft, right? Most teams would probably just go Corki here. Or Oriana, right? But we're talking about Caps. He's got a lot of picks available. You can even go Tristana here. It would probably be also okay, but it's all about the opportunity cost and what you're giving up. Maybe they don't like the idea of the way Tristana makes the comp flow differently, right? G2 must have realized that they need a mid laner that has a lot of pressure and helps them get leverage for their remaining picks. So with that being said, what is this Kalista doing here, right? Zyra Khan is the new bot lane duo this week, I would say, because of probably something having to do with scrims or something like that. That has taken over pretty much every other lane, right? It's taken precedence over all of them. This is most likely something to do with flavor and the way the drafts proceed with, let's say you pick this and then you pick something like the Varus and then they counter with Vi and then you go into those dynamics. Maybe teams are starting to realize they just don't want to deal with it anymore. And they can just go Zyra Khan, and you can have a lot of pressure against things like Lucian, Milio, or even the Varus Ashe, right? I could see in terms of laning, it would actually fare pretty well. So, very possible. And G2 continue to push their support pick back. So they're slowly limiting themselves in terms of what options they can pick with this Kalista. And the main things that G2 can use to counter are probably going to be based on what picks Giant X go for here, right? Right now, they have very strong laning and they have very strong team fighting. It's honestly a very strong draft right now. They've got a lot of pressure. So although G2 has a couple of decent picks in order to potentially counter the Zyra Khan lane with the Kalista, it seems that it's very on a fine line, right? It's very contingent on what picks they use in order to take advantage of the LeBlanc pressure that they're going to have. So what do they pick with their B4, B5 in order to make advantage of this? Is the Cassante top with weak side, and then the Nico support, which is the most weird part about this draft. I'm not going to pretend like I know much about this Nico support versus Zyra Khan matchup, but the idea here is most likely having to do with being able to threaten the engage from the bot lane. And a fragile support like this definitely needs the hand-holding from the LeBlanc. And that's probably why they probably picked it in this order, right? The fundamentals are there in terms of, hey, we're going to pick our, most blindable, highest priority picks, as well as picks that are just good in a vacuum here. And then we're going to push back our interesting picks or like flexible picks for later. In this case, it's so interesting that I don't think most teams should actually recommend this. If let's say if you took the names of these teams out of the equation, and you just stare at all 10 champions, I would tell you that the Giant X draft, like, the draft on the right is going to be a lot easier to play and, a lot more room in order to make mistakes and just scale and just have pressure. Like, it's very easy to play for, right? Versus, on this blue side draft, it just looks like my solo queue games. Like, it doesn't look proper. But when you add the context of how G2 likes to play as a team, they're very high execution and they're very well established as a unit. I think this is a draft that makes sense to them. And that's what I wanted to point out with this, right? We've seen teams like T1 draft like this before too, where they think drafts that scale with the players, and it's very unique, right? Mickey is probably the only player that I know of that would play Nico support and pro play. And, you can use these unique characteristics of your players to your advantage. So maybe to the untrained eye, it doesn't look that good of a draft for G2, but the idea here is you provide that context.